Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello everyone, welcome to my lecture. So today I'm going to discuss about the macroeconomics elements of public policy. So far we already discussed about microeconomics quite at length, especially from the markets point of view with regard to insurance, uncertainty, choice and externalities. So today onwards we'll spend couple of time, like couple of lectures will be devoting on different elements of macroeconomics in public policy. So again, I'll just like to highlight that we will not discuss everything in details, but then some of the technical details that we need to understand for public policy from the macroeconomics point of view, that we'll discuss at length. As we know that aggregate demand that we represent as AD is the relationship between the price and then total output in the economy. So that is what aggregate demand that we call it. So to understand aggregate demand, let us also understand what what we call quantity theory demand for money, and which can try to connect with aggregate demand. So here this equation that we are quite familiar with as a students of economics, it's like MV equals to PY, and where we know that capital M is the total money supply in the economy, and as we know that central bank, in case of India, it is Reserve Bank of India, is actually money supply, the total money supply in the economy. So RBI injects money to the economy. Capital V is the velocity of money, like how money should be circulated in the economy. And capital P is the price level, like aggregate price level, and capital Y, as we know, that is the amount of output. So P and Y, like price level and total amount of output, this is very much, these two components are part of the transactions in the economy. So this is like this is very fundamental principles of economics that we understand as a student of economics. As we said that principles of macroeconomics is also prerequisite for this particular course. So I'll request all of you, I urge you to see all the elements and all the principles once again, just to understand much better, especially when we discuss macroeconomics in context of public policy. So to move on, from graphically we can write this way, like P price level, general aggregate price level, is being measured along with the vertical axis, and then income or output Y is measured at horizontal axis. And when we say that these two are functional relationship that we are trying to understand, and here aggregate demand is basically the downward sloping. So now as we already introduced this particular equation, what we call grand macroeconomic equations, both in case of closed economy and also in case of open economy, in our one of the earlier introductory classes in economics of public policy. So I'll write once again, like say aggregate demand, which is nothing, is basically equivalent to the total output, which is C, like total consumption expenditure plus investment expenditure plus government expenditure. So this we can say as equation 1, and this particular equation that we know, this is in case of this equation in case of closed economy. In case of open economy, so aggregate demand will be, or grand macroeconomic equations will be capital Y, which is total output, is consumption expenditure, then investment expenditure, then government expenditure, plus export, and then minus import, which is nothing, is basically x minus m, which it is actually net export, and this is we can give as equation 2, and this is in case of open economy. So aggregate demand function is the downward sloping, and that represents the relationship between aggregate price level and then total aggregate output or national income, as we know. So now the shift in the aggregate demand, if money supply reduces, then due to reduction in the money supply, aggregate demand will move downward, like aggregate AD1 was the first aggregate demand, first level, and then after the reduction of the money, aggregate demand curve will shift downward, and therefore you can see that output also will be reduced, like say here at one point. So and then we can see after reduction of the money supply, so total income will move from Y1 to Y2, and then price level also will go down from P1 to P2. Likewise, when money supply increases, then aggregate demand curve shifts upward, which is rightward, and then likewise what we had shown in, say, in panel A, so price level will increase and output level or income level will also be increased. So this is what, when it happens, like when there is a shift in the aggregate demand. So this is just to reiterate once again for you, so that you can contextualize how we use elements of macroeconomics or components of macroeconomics while discussing about the public policy, and what is their important role in overall policy framework. And as I said that in economics, planning and policies are very much integral part of economic outcome, because economic outcome actually depends on what kind of tax policies or how progressive taxation or how regressive taxation policies are there. So that we'll also discuss much more in details in our next few lectures. But then here I'm just trying to convey that in economics, policy and planning, these are very much integral part of the discussions, especially how tax impacts on the overall output or subsidy impacts on the overall output. In fact, with regard to externalities, in context of market and individual market and individual utility level also we discussed, like how and what are the impacts of taxations and subsidies on the overall outcome, right? So let's move next to discuss with the aggregate demand and aggregate expenditure, because that is what important. And before showing that relationship, let us also once again revise all the concepts, technical definitions that we know. Like first is, let us begin with planned expenditure. So what is planned expenditure? Planned expenditure, the amount households, firms and the government would like to spend on goods and services. So that is a plan, like entire goods and services will be spent by say different households and also firms and government. And we also already know that there is a relationship between household and farm, and there is also circular flow between household and farms, and there we also discussed in one of our earlier lectures that how government also plays important role there, and also what is the role of the banking, like financial intermediaries, right? So this is what planned expenditure. Now move to the actual expenditure, that is the amount that household, firms and government spend on goods and services. So it is basically, from the term itself it is clear, it is like actual expenditure, and planned is what we would like to, like as a household and firm and government would like to spend. It's basically the budget part of it, and then actual is like what are actually being spent after 1 year of the planning expenditure. So determinants of the planned expenditure is like what are the plan that we make is basically through consumption expenditure. It's like C, capital C, then investment expenditure, capital I, then government purchase like capital G, and in case of open economy, that is the next export that we represent as NX. NX is nothing, is basically X and M, and if it is surplus, then export will exceed more than import, and export in case of deficit, it is export will be less than total import. So now let's move to the next. So here that all of us we know, but then let us spend a bit on the component wise, as we know that capital Y equals to C plus I plus G. So here our discussion is actually on C. So what is C? Like, consumption. So consumption has two parts. One is autonomous consumption, like small a if we represent, and induced consumption, which is the consumption that will be depending on the total expenditures. So one consumption will be independent, like say precautionary, some sudden accident happens or natural hazard, and that's how some autonomous consumption happens. And induced consumption means consumption that we do which is depending on the overall output, like Y. So at the individual level also we can actually understand that some of the expenditures are like autonomous expenditure, like consumption expenditure, as some of the essential consumptions which actually depends on the total income, like Y. So it is depending on the income. So how, as the equation we can write? So we can write as a C is equals to small a plus by. So it is very clear, and we know that if y increases, definitely consumption also will increase. So here Y is independent, but then consumption is dependent on the income, like overall income. So and how it is interrelated? It is actually, it will be interrelated with the B. So B is referred as marginal propensity to consume. So this B is very important, like how consumption expenditure and overall output, they are interrelated, and small b is the determinant or coefficient that actually determine the relationship between consumption and Y, and small b is nothing, this is called MPC, what we call that already we know, that marginal propensity to consume. And here we have shown like how it is measured, like MPC is nothing, changes in the total consumption, like changes here even from this say equation 1 here. So from here if we do changes in the total consumption due to 1 unit changes in the output, what is the marginal, what is the propensity to consume? So that basically nothing, A is constant, and then it will be referred as B. So B is what we are referring as marginal propensity to consume. So graphically that we know that it is very clear that consumption and consumption expenditure, planned consumption expenditure and total output, they are positively related and upward sloping. And here we can see like the point that it is starting. So this is like C and Y, they are interrelated, and this slope is nothing, this is the slope that we are actually referring as B here, and then this intercept is nothing, is basically A. A is the autonomous consumption expenditure. So moving further with the planned expenditure by the firm. So planned expenditure by the firm is nothing, is basically planned investment, also known as intended investment by the firms, refers to the purchase of the capital stock and the machinery to produce goods and services, and it is assumed to be fixed at the given time or the period. So for any farm, so planned expenditure for 1 year, for instance, if we are taking time is 1 year, then planned expenditure will be depending on how much intended investment on the purchase of the capital stock and the machineries for the production function. So as we already know that farms will have the production function, which is nothing, we can actually say once again, like, is a production function which is function of labor and capital, and this is like say production function of the farm. And then here we have kept only two variables, labor and capital, and this capital is encompasses of the purchase of capital stock and machinery to produce goods and services. So here this is what the planned sort of investment by the farm, which is actually considered as a fixed. So obviously capital is a fixed, which in order to produce any goods and services, capital, machineries and capital stock needs to be fixed, but then labor is basically variable that we are talking about here. So but then in the fixed amount of planned expenditure, always it is constant, and therefore planned investment is a horizontal straight line that we have referred here, and this investment and income is planned investment and income. This particular graphical representation shows that horizontal straight line, which is actually planned which means planned expenditure is fixed at say capital I bar. So capital I bar amount of investment is required for the capital stock and machineries to buy machineries to capital goods and services. So now in the economy, in equilibrium, how it happens, like we have to now plot, and here we like say here vertical axis, which is like expenditure, and in expenditure we have actually plotted both, we have considered both planned and actual expenditure, and then here on the horizontal axis we are taking income or output. So as we know that consumption function or consumption expenditure function is upward sloping, like starting from here, and this is induced, like this amount is intercept is A, like autonomous consumption. So and then planned expenditure where we get C plus I, so that is our planned expenditure. So here C plus, like say Y equals to C plus I if we consider, and then I, for instance, we are keeping it constant from the planned investment point of view, and then this particular consumption expenditure line will shift parallel, and that is nothing is basically planned expenditure, which includes in planned investment as well. So this gap is basically I bar, and here we are getting E naught, which is equilibrium, and here the dotted or dashed line represents, blue dashed line represents actual expenditure, where assumption is actual expenditure, if we consider as Y, is equals to planned expenditure, what we are referring as PE, and then the equilibrium where we get it. So this is what we call like Y star amount of income or output that we'll get from say planned expenditures point of view, like say PE or E star level, right? So this is what the equilibrium conditions, and this E point where planned expenditures, as we know that and meets at the actual expenditure, that cross is popularly known as Keynesian cross. That please remember that, because in government policies, if you look at including Indian economy, somewhere or the other Keynesian economies were followed at various levels. For instance, it is to be believed that Nehruvian policies, Nehruvian and Mahalanobis policies for the economic growth is basically they followed Keynesian model as a backdrop. Similarly, during Great Depression, as we know, that Keynesian economy could give the explanations for the hyper unemployment and hyperinflations by showing role of the government. Even during COVID-19, there also role of institution or role of government came much more interesting way, and that only Keynesian economics actually could help us to understand how economy should actually follow. We'll discuss this with the help of the different policies that we have adopted, and maybe we can discuss much more in details. So now let us see what kind of adjustment to the equilibrium that we have. So we already know this because we had already drawn, but then let's take 2 points here. One point we can take, say, at point A, and here another 1 point, say point B. And Keynesian cross is at O naught, as we know, and then actual expenditure, it is straight line originating from the origin, which is like 45 degrees, that that particular line, and here blue dashed line represents actual expenditure. And then planned expenditure, as we know, that C plus I. So we are not considering only C, we are considering here C plus I, because with the consumption, planned investment is also included here. So now 2 points at point A and point B, what happens here? So OA amount of, say, of the output, so which is before or below the Keynesian cross, like below the equilibrium, like E naught. Here we can see planned expenditure is much more higher than the actual expenditure. So there is a positive gap, right? So it is basically what we call this particular gap, what we call unplanned drop in inventory causes income to rise. So here planned expenditure is like more higher than the actual that we spend. The other point that we call it, like, say, point B, where actual expenditure is much more higher than the planned expenditure, what we are calling it unplanned inventory accumulation causes income to fall. So actual expenditure is basically higher than the planned expenditure. So this is basically the adjustment that we are talking about to equilibrium in the Keynesian cross, and these are very important from the macroeconomic policies point of view, where economy will be stabilized, and that's how we actually move. So now let us understand about the multiplier and equilibrium output point of view, right? So we already know, we already have this point, like say y equals to consumption and investment, and then we have C, which is equals to A plus by. So we already know from the consumption. So here, say this is like grand output, which is just a function of consumption and investment. We haven't included government expenditure even within the closed economy. So government expenditure will bring it later. So let us first try to understand what is the multiplier, like what Keynesian multiplier that we are talking about. So now if we plot, so like say this is equation 2, if we putting value of 2 into, say, equation 1, then it will be y equals to A plus by plus I, right? Here we can rewrite as y minus by equals to A plus I. Here we can rewrite y equals to 1 minus b equals to A plus I. Here we can write as y equals to A plus I by 1 minus b. So it's basically 1 by 1 minus b. So 1 by 1 minus b is actually multiplier. We can refer as small k. So k is a multiplier, and here we can say that income is like total income, like total output is positively related to I. Just one more point that I would like to highlight here, that marginal propensity to consume plus marginal propensity to save is equals to 1. So here if we write small b is marginal propensity to consume plus small a is if we write as marginal propensity to save, then this 2 will be equals to 1. So it is very clear, like small b will be equals to 1 minus small s. So this point that I'd like to again highlight, because saving, while calculating saving ratio and savings, and is trying to relate how savings is related to income or how saving impacts on the income. So in that particular case we also need to know what is the marginal propensity to save. So now moving forward, just let us take an example, like this example that I am taking it just to show you like how government expenditures, government policies are depending on the multiplier, and then when at the time of policy frame, especially in case of macroeconomics, these are so important that we keep this into mind, especially multiplier. Like take the example of this simple example, like from the Keynesian cross. Assume that consumption function is given like this, like C equals to autonomous consumption here is 200, and then say small b, which is marginal propensity to consume, which is like nothing is like del dc by dy is equals to 0.75, and from 0.75 we know that marginal propensity to consume is like 75% of the income. That means 0.25 is basically marginal propensity to save, is like 75% of the income goes for the consumption, and 0.25 means 25% of the income it goes for the savings. So this is just interpretations, economic interpretations from this particular equations. So now planned investment, it is given like say planned investment that we know as like capital I, which is 100, and then the point that we'd like to highlight here, then what is the equilibrium level of output, like income, what is the equilibrium level of consumption and savings, and then also we like to show graphically like what is the planned expenditure as a function of income, and show the equilibrium, like how it also changes in the overall graph. So from the equation that we can get it like capital Y is equals to capital C plus I, and capital I, C we already know from say this is if we give equation 1, from equation 1 we can put the value of equation 1 here like 200 plus 0.75y plus I, which is given like 100. So here we can easily calculate 300, and here we can see 0.25y 300 like capital Y equals to 300.25 generally. So from here we already got the value of y. So if we plot the point like value of y in consumption function, then C will be equals to 200 plus 0.75 by 1200, then C is equals to say 1100, we get it. And then savings is nothing, I mean we already know savings is a function is equals to y minus C, here like 200 minus 1100, which is nothing, is like 100, right? So this is what we got it. So we already know the total level of income, which is 1200. What is the equilibrium level of consumptions? Here 1100. Here what is the savings level? 100. Then graphically we can actually plot. Let us plot this too, and here like say C plus I like planned expenditure, and here total output, right? So here we can write first is like say here C equals to what is the C here? C here is 200 plus let's say 200 plus 0.75 here, and then capital I here. So capital I is 100, so that means it will be C plus I is basically 300. 100 will be getting added here plus 0.75 y. So here is the y equals to planned expenditure. This is like a straight line, is like 45 degree as we know, and here the equilibrium that we are talking about, and this is the y equals to 1200. So this is what graphically we can actually show how it changes when the value of C, I and this will be given. So I stop here, and of course we'll continue this particular discussion further because we haven't completed about the aggregate demand, because we are left with aggregate demand and then how government expenditure and how taxes they are impacting to each other. So these are the two references for this particular lecture that I have considered. One is Freund and Mankiw. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'll see you in my next class.